Big warm welcome to you all out there. Tonight, we're going to be talking about leading and enabling quality use of research in schools, proudly brought to you by the Q Project. I'd like to welcome you all out there, but before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge country. I'm currently seated within the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects past, present, and emerging. We manifest this in our respects through our research, our teaching and learning, the Wurundjeri and Boon Wurrung elders, and their past, present, and future communities. So, we have a wonderful panel set up for you tonight, but I'd like to first welcome you all out there. We have registrations from all over the world, including Saudi Arabia, the Philippines, China, India, the UK, Indonesia, and Sri Lanka, amongst others. Welcome to you all out there. I'd also like to acknowledge our wonderful project director, Mark Rickinson, who's also online as we speak. Our Q team, for which this is all entirely possible because a great team of colleagues have put this research together as a talking point for our speakers tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge the Paul Ramsay Foundation, in particular John Bush, who has been a wonderful partner and guide to the project, as well as the teachers and school leaders who have worked with us throughout this project. We are incredibly appreciative of your generosity and your time and your valuable contributions to our work. To you live streamers out there, you can put your questions and comments into the YouTube comments section, but you have to be registered on YouTube first. We'd also encourage you to use Twitter and tweet throughout the presentation. You can use hashtags such as hashtag Cure, Q-U-R-E, hashtag using evidence better, hashtag research in action, and if you tag us at Monash Q Project and Monash Education. So tonight we're talking about one particular area of the Q Project. Now, the Q Project itself is about how we can better understand and improve the use of research evidence by teachers in schools. Using research and evidence in practice is neither simple nor straightforward and depends on skilled educators, committed leaders, and supportive cultures. So tonight, we're going to have the pleasure of hearing about some of the findings and the reflections of a group of experts. Types of questions we're going to be looking at are things like, how can school leaders support educators to use research well in practice? What role can system leaders play in improving research use across schools? How can system and school leaders develop a common understanding of using research well? And now I'd like to briefly introduce our wonderful speakers. First off, we have Dr. Jo Gleeson, who's a research fellow on the Q Project. There's Jo, welcome. Jo is a research fellow, as I mentioned. She draws from cross-sectorial professional experience in executive human resource management, business consulting, careers counselling and education, as well as education research. And Jo's worked in secondary schools, large Australian and international corporate organisations, professional services and tertiary education. And she has a range of research areas, but tonight she's going to be talking about her really important work on the Q Project. Our next speaker is Meg Bryden. She's Student Engagement, Wellbeing and Transitions Leader at Ashwood High School here in Victoria, where I'm based. Meg is a learning specialist, currently in the role of middle school student engagement, wellbeing and transition leader in the northeastern Victorian region. She's the teacher of students in English, and EAL, digital technologies, humanities, and PE. A very warm welcome to you, Meg. Next, we also have Troy Veray, who's Deputy Principal at Marsden Road Public School in New South Wales. Troy is currently a literacy and numeracy instructional leader and has teaching and leadership experience in Australian, English and Australian schools over the last decade. His professional interests focus on shifting the culture of education from one based on ideologies to one based on science. And his current projects include developing teacher curriculum and content knowledge, cultivating evidence-based pedagogy, and improving assessment practices for literacy and numeracy. He's currently a member of the Macquarie University Centre for Reading Advisory Board and Sharing Best Practice Community. And last but not least, bonjour to Dr. Tracy Burns, who's based in Paris. Dr. Burns is Senior Analyst at the OECD Centre for Educational Research and Innovation. She's Chief of Research in that centre, and she heads a portfolio of projects, including trend shaping education, 21st century children, and strengthening the impact of educational research. Her most recent OECD publications are Back to the Future of Education, 4 OECD scenarios for schooling, education in the digital age, happy and healthy children, and educating 21st century children emotional well-being in the digital age. So we're about to kick off. We invite you to participate in the conversation online. We're going to hear these wonderful presentations, but at the same time, we want this to be a dialogue, an exploration of the key issues raised by our speakers. So let's kick it off. Our first speaker is Dr. Jo Gleeson. Welcome, Jo. Who will be joining us in just a moment. There she is. Welcome, Jo.
Hi, sorry about that, everyone. But thank you, Lucas, for the handover, and welcome to everyone online. We're really excited about your participation tonight and what I think will be a fantastic Q event where we're talking, as Lucas said, all things leadership and research use. For those of you not familiar with the Q project, or for those of you just wanting a bit of a refresher about what we're all about, as Lucas said, the Q project is a partnership between Monash University and the Paul Ramsay Foundation to understand and improve the use of research in Australian schools. We're 3 years into what is a 5-year journey, so we're over halfway at this point. Tonight, I'll be drawing on survey and interview findings that we've gathered over the last 18 months through our research activities with school leaders and teachers in Strand 2. From Strand 1, where we conducted a cross-sectoral review of literature regarding research use, we conceptualised a framework of quality research use. The framework comprises 2 core components at the centre here on this slide: appropriate research that is thoughtfully engaged with and implemented. Quality research use is then supported or facilitated by 3 individual enabling components: skill sets, mindsets, and relationships. And 3 organisational components: culture, leadership, and infrastructure. These components are situated within a complex system of influences. Tonight, again, as Lucas said, we're focusing on the key organisational enabler of school leadership. Quite simply, leaders are critical to effective research use in schools. If I was being provocative, I could say that leaders are the single most important catalyst for using research in schools. When listening and talking with Australian educators, we're getting clear messages about the critical role that leaders play in enabling the quality use of research. Using our interview data, for example, 89% of our interviewees felt that quality leadership resulted in quality research use, with 96% saying that leaders were instrumental in creating a research-rich culture within their schools. Overall, educators felt that leaders were critical in 4 key ways. That is sourcing, modelling, involving, and supporting. Let's go through these. In one recent survey of over 800 Australian school leaders and teachers, we asked them about how they accessed, used, and sourced research, with nearly 80% looking to their school leaders to bring research into the school and share it with staff. Educators also told us that without their principals, without key leaders in their schools, they may not even find or access research, let alone use it. But besides being a key source of research, leaders were also seen as important facilitators of contextualising research. Educators were clear that if research was going to be used at all, it needed to be tailored to the school's setting, it needed to be practical, as well as easy to apply. And leaders, again, were seen as instrumental in making this happen. In another survey of nearly 500 educators, it was clear that leaders were significantly more confident in their research use skills and their initiation of research use actions when compared with teachers. They were also significantly more likely to source research themselves as well. But being confident about research and using it themselves is not enough. Teachers in particular look to leaders to role model quality use of research. Nearly 70% of educators who we interviewed believed leaders needed to encourage their staff to use research, showing them how to do it, but most importantly, why. It was critical for leaders to understand the research themselves and explain it to others, including helping staff engage with how the research was going to be most suited for their needs. Next is involving. For educators, using research is social. Relationships with others and opportunities to collaborate, both formally and informally, are key to research being used well. Almost 100% of our interviewees indicated that relationships were essential for quality research use. From our survey data, nearly 80% of all teachers and school leaders used research to have discussions with others. And those respondents who believed that their schools facilitated collaborative learning opportunities were significantly more likely to use research as well. Leaders are essential to collaborative research use. When bringing research into the school and looking to adapt and implement it in practice, it is critical that leaders foster buy-in from all staff, making sure that staff feel involved and have common understanding of and approaches to the research implementation. Leaders create partnerships as well with external experts, such as universities, and help forge and extend networks for staff to engage with other schools and colleagues to learn about best practice. Last, ensuring that research use is supported by appropriate infrastructure is seen as a key accountability of school leaders. 100% of our interviewees supported this. And interestingly, nearly 90% of the same interviewees told us that if leaders did not get this right, then poor research use resulted. The key areas of infrastructure for quality research use were these. Number one, top of the list, making time available. 2, making sure research use was linked to key processes like planning and performance management. 3, embedding research into meetings and professional learning sessions. And 4, providing resources such as access to online libraries or having a resource centre at the school. Equally important was ensuring that staff were not overloaded with work or feeling like there were competing agendas in the school that crowded out time to find and use research. Teachers in particular looked to leaders to clear schedules and prioritise time to use research. So, Lucas, if I was leaving leaders with one key message, it would be this: you are essential to quality research use in your school. We suggest you are essential in 4 key ways: sourcing and contextualising research for your school community, modelling quality research use behaviours, attitudes and approaches, involving all staff in research use and ensuring a clear and consistent purpose for research use is understood. And last, supporting research use through sufficient time, access, and resources, and the linking of research use to school processes, plans, and goals. Both Meg and Troy here tonight have been very insightful and enthusiastic participants in the Q project over the last 18 months. And they're both leaders themselves. When listening to their stories, we encourage you to listen to how these key leadership ingredients are reflected in the research cultures and practices of their school. Back to you, Lucas.
Thanks, Joe. I was planning to do a summation and a segue to our next speakers, but that was beautiful. So thanks very much, Joe. We've set up the case now of the important role of school leaders. We've also talked about the use of research as being very social, and it's about everyone rowing the boat. So great setup, Joe. I'd like to now hand over to Meg. Welcome, Meg.
Thanks so much, Lucas. And thanks, Joe. It's so exciting to be on this panel tonight with these really inspiring and experienced panelists. And I must admit, when I was first offered the opportunity to be on the panel, I sort of thought, what do I have to offer? Sitting next to these people who have so much wonderful experience. But in reflecting on that, I realised many of you listening may be middle leaders yourselves. You might be classroom teachers aspiring to be a middle leader in future. You might be senior leaders like my colleagues on the panel who work to support and develop middle leaders. So I hope that what I'm able to share tonight might give you some insight into how middle leaders can assist with using research evidence in schools. Speaking of supportive senior leaders, I'm really lucky to have fantastic supportive senior leaders at my school, particularly my executive principal, Brett Moore. The leaders at my school really challenge and coach me in my leadership all the time. I'm still quite new to leadership. As you can see, I've been a middle leader since last year in an acting capacity. So I moved to Ashwood High School, and that was a very deliberate choice. I'm very lucky to work at a fantastic school. We're on quite a significant change journey and undertaking a really big cultural shift. And that's really evident in Year 7 enrolments. They've increased from 33 in 2015 to 180 in 2020. So there's really big and exciting change happening at my school. And that's very much as a result of some very strong values and a strong vision for the school that the students are really able to articulate, and they can even speak about how that's present in their everyday undertakings at school. So our next area of focus as a school is to really focus on the development and fine-tuning of our teaching and learning. And so use of research evidence is going to be extremely important for our school to support this goal. So when I was invited to be part of the Q project, I was in my first year in my middle leader position, acting as middle school student engagement, wellbeing and transitions leader, which basically means that I oversee our team of staff who support all of our students in years 7 to 9. So as a new middle leader, there are plenty of challenges, and many of those connect or translate really well to the use of research evidence as well. So as a middle leader, many people coming into middle leadership have had quite a bit of time since they've been in university, and I know that I certainly, embarking on my middle leadership experience, felt out of touch with research. It had been a long time since I'd had time to sit down and read research purely for the interest. And of course, you're balancing those demands of classroom teaching and leadership because all educators are educators because we want to work with kids and do the very best that we can for them. And so that sort of challenge in balancing those two things, but also thinking about, well, where can I find some extra time to start using some research? And as well, being quite a young middle leader, I had that feeling of, people refer to it as imposter syndrome. Last year I had 2 teachers who were in my team who are extremely experienced practitioners. And one of them, in fact, has been working at our school since before I was born. And she's the most amazing mentor. But what can I offer them in terms of leading them in how to use research evidence? So I was really thrilled to be able to be part of the Q project and examine my own use of research evidence and also learn more about how to best use it. I'm also extremely lucky at my school. I mentioned before my executive principal, Brett Moore, and he has a real commitment to regular coaching with middle leaders. And Joe mentioned earlier the importance of leadership in ensuring that research evidence is used well in schools. And so I'm extremely lucky that I get to undertake regular coaching with my principal. And some of the things that he has talked to me a lot about is focusing on routines and processes in my own way of going about my role to ensure that management itself is taken care of so that I can really focus on leading. And so that was something that I thought a lot about in my efforts to find time within a busy school day to ensure that I was using research evidence. So when I spoke to the Q project, I was working on a particular project at the time in my role in the middle school. And so I go into my interview and the first question they ask is, how do you use research? And I'm thinking to myself, wow, that's a very big question. Where do I start? But my interviewer was extremely clever at eliciting ideas and sort of asked great questions. So you can see the brief here on the slide. I was working on developing curriculum for our program at Ashwood High School called Tutor Group. And so by having a quick look at the brief there, you can see that there's some pretty big challenges in that brief. And so naturally, I wanted our response to the brief to be informed by research. The scope of that brief is quite big. The allocated time per week is very short. And we have that vertical grouping, meaning that we have a significant breadth and difference in experience of the students undertaking the program. And we also were replacing a previous program that had lost a little bit of credibility with staff and students. And so having something that was backed with research evidence was going to be really important for its credibility and legitimacy moving forward as well. So when I got to thinking about how to undertake this project, I sort of didn't quite know what process to use. And I couldn't find a lot of literature out there about how best to go about it. So basically what I did, I thought about consulting mentors. And so I'm extremely privileged that I have a number of amazing mentors from previous schools, within my own school, as I've already mentioned, and that I have met through other community elements of education. And so I started off by consulting mentors and talking to them about the brief that I'd been given and how I might be able to approach it. And they sort of suggested some theorists and some readings where I could start. And that allowed me to establish key terms and areas of focus for directing the research reading that I was going to do moving forward. And so from there, I decided which research findings were most relevant to our context. And, you know, Joe also spoke about the importance of context, and that was really key for us understanding how we could use research to design our tutor group program to work for Ashwood High School. And then from there, working with a small team, we summarised some findings from the reading that we had done and took those into consideration when designing a program to propose to our principal. And then, of course, we presented those research findings when making the proposal to the principal and then later to school council for approval. And I'm really pleased to say that we have implemented the program this year in 2021, the tutor group program, and it's been a really, really great start this year. We, of course, need to do some further reflection and some fine tuning, but we're very pleased with the change we've made in our school. So I guess I thought about how I responded to this need to use research. And so it was my first time leading a project where use of research was going to be essential. And so I thought about what my responses were. And my sort of gut response, and people who know me well know that I'm a real perfectionist. And my first thought was, well, if I don't know how to do this 100% correctly from the outset, I better not do it at all. And, you know, everybody else, my colleagues are more well-read than me. They know more about theorists than I do. And I wasn't quite sure how to go about starting the use of research evidence. But I did really love the idea of research, and I love learning and loved university and all the reading I was able to do there. The other competing priority, though, were the deadlines and the timelines in a school. You know, the fact that you're thinking about the school year cycle and when the new academic year is starting. And so there's that pressure. I need to have this proposal ready in time for it to be approved by school council in order for it to be implemented for the next academic year. And so that does make it tempting to not use research evidence properly. But I really committed to it with my team and felt that that was really important. And then I mentioned earlier as well, mentors, and the fact that I have these wonderful mentors who I trust so deeply, and that ability to lean on mentors and seek some advice was really key for me. And then the last one, and you know, this is common to pretty much everybody in education, I think, is time. We know that time is always a battle in teaching. And so I sort of reflected on, you know, the priorities, and I thought also about picking battles. So thinking about whether you're making a short-term or a long-term decision, or a short-term or a long-term proposal, and really wanting to, because this was going to be a very long-term proposal that we were making, wanting to use research evidence to ensure that it was really guaranteed and viable curriculum. And so I mentioned earlier that I have the opportunity to have lots of coaching with my principal, and he is a big fan of an analogy. And so you'll see a bit of a crazy picture on the screen there. That's actually me playing football. And so when I'm not teaching, I play football, and my principal often uses a football analogy with me. So in terms of my reflections, I wanted to share with you a bit of a football analogy. And I first started thinking about it because of that hesitancy that I had with using research evidence. And it kind of reminded me of a football game, you know, that first tackle or the first bump of the game that gives you that confidence that you know you're going to get in there and have a really good game and win the ball for your team. And so I sort of felt the same about research evidence. You know, I did some, and then I felt a bit more comfortable and confident. And now I feel really confident sharing use of research with my team. It's also really important when you play football to know your role on the team. And so I would encourage middle leaders out there to look at your middle leadership team. Make sure that you know the players that are around you in your school. Are you learning together? Are you all at the start of your journey? Are there some who are much more experienced and can help you and become mentors? If you've got great senior leaders, how can they support you to feel confident in using research? They'll have a wealth of knowledge. So, you know, seek coaching from them, lean on them a little bit. I also think in footy, watching some other games and watching some other players is a really great way to improve your football. And so I've found it really useful to network. It's been really great to have perspectives from outside of my school's bubble. And so that can be achieved through things like subject associations or Facebook groups, previous colleagues that you might be in contact with, and the internet has really taken off in this regard during our periods of lockdown in Australia. And then the last one I'd say is when you're playing footy, you're always looking out for opportunities. I'm a midfielder, not much of a goal kicker, but there wasn't a whole lot of games this year due to COVID, but sometime in June, I found myself with a free kick about 30 metres out in the corridor, kick on goal, and I was a bit surprised by that. So looking out for those opportunities, look out for opportunities for further study, look out for opportunities for grants to support your use of research, look out for the Q Project co-design workshop, which is coming up next week, which I'm excited to participate in, that will give me an opportunity to continue to develop my practice in this area. So I've been so thrilled to be able to be part of this, and I hope that my reflections might help you, if you're a middle leader, to feel like you can take the first step in leading your colleagues in the use of research evidence. Thanks so much, Lucas.
Fabulous stuff, Meg. Fabulous stuff indeed. What we want to look for as researchers is the shape of the thing. What does it look like in practice? And that was both inspiring and tangible. And some key themes come out of there, including very elementary ones, such as how do you use research? That is the question. Ask yourself that, as we should ask ourselves that as well as academics. The role of confidence, mentors, finding time are all themes that resonate very much with the research that we're doing. Pick your battles was another important theme, I thought. And, going back to the time element, it's been something that's been preoccupying our attention at the moment. And I should promote a survey that we did of over 1,000 educators that's just been published recently in the form of the latest Q Suite. And I'd urge viewers online to check it out. It's called Making Time to Use Research Well in Practice. So some wonderful themes there, but the best theme of all, I thought, was something that resonated with us, which is that using research well is a team sport. It was a fantastic presentation, Meg. Thanks so much. I'd now like to... You're very, very welcome. I'd now like to invite Troy, Deputy Principal of Marsden Road Public School. Welcome aboard, Troy.
Thanks for that, Lucas. So today I'm going to share just some of the work that we've done at my school, Marsden Road Public School, in terms of getting research into the classroom, moving from leadership to innovation in 5 steps. A bit about my school. We're in southwest Sydney. We're a school of just over 700. We have a variety of different kids at our school. About 80% have English as a second language. We have about 20% of our students go through the refugee experience, and often low socioeconomic status is something we have to deal with as well. So what I'm looking at today is sort of how we started. Why do we need research in the classroom? So at our school, we've been on this journey for about 5 years. And in our school plan, we've now decided that our aim is to deliver quality education that sets the educational foundations of literacy and numeracy. Are our kids literate? Are they numerate? Can they write successfully? Can they comprehend what they're reading? Not just aiming for minimum standards, making sure our kids are proficient. And then the other part of it is building that social emotional side of it, so they have the capacity to be confident, productive, successful and resilient members of society, making sure that they're good citizens. So keeping that in mind, we also take on board the idea that we have our teaching standards, the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers. And the first two, knowing the students and how they learn, and knowing the content and how to teach it, is very important. So there's sort of 2 areas that guide what we're doing at our school. So keeping those 2 things in mind, we ask ourselves, how do we use our knowledge of how students learn to provide a quality education? We're not simply guessing or using our anecdotal evidence. We need to know we're giving quality education, from research and from using the teaching standards. So as a way of getting research into the classroom, I've sort of come up with a bit of a strategy, to make sure we're giving that quality education. Hopefully they're 5 simple steps. They're quite in depth once you're working through them. You don't have to tick one off to go to the next one, but they're just helpful sort of underlying principles to help you get research into the classroom. So the first one is analyse the research. As a leader, my role and the other leaders at our school, we look at the research. Teachers have already enough on their plate. They haven't got the time to be going through research as well. So one thing strategy we use is Daniel Willingham's from his book, When Can You Trust the Experts? How to Tell Good Science from Bad Teaching. He's got 4 steps. So he talks about stripping and flipping the research, looking at it. If you do X, what's the percentage chance of something happening? Is there an 80% chance of something being successful? And then if you flip it, what do you do with the 20% of those that were unsuccessful? Once you've done that, you really get to the bare bones of the research. Trace it. Is it valid and reliable? Is it coming from a source that making the right decisions when they're researching to give you the information? The third step, analyze. So did it work? Did they set out? Did the research show there was success using that strategy or using those skills with the participants? And the last one is, should you use it? If you're already getting success in your school, perhaps you don't need to reinvent the wheel, continue what you're doing. Maybe you need to tweak some things, those strategies there. So from analysing the research, as leaders, your job then is to distill. So we do that at our school. We distill the research. We present ongoing embedded professional development. So we make those critical decisions. How are we going to help the students? And then we distill it with the teachers. We start off whole school, so everyone's getting the same message. And there's sort of the introduction, making sure everyone's getting all the information. And then we blend that with our teams, making sure small teams, could be stages, year 3 and year 4 working together, building their skills, and then also working with the individuals. That's where your coaching and your mentoring comes in. A little side note here, sometimes you might be the teacher on your own trying to find research, and if you haven't got time to analyse, you want somewhere that's already distilled it for you. And some useful places that we found along our way at our school is CC, the Centre for Educational Statistics and Evaluation from the New South Wales Department. Really helpful. A couple of articles on cognitive load theory and effective instruction for teaching early years reading. There's AERO, the Australian Education Research Organisation, relatively new. But they've got some great handouts you can grab. I was looking at one about spacing and retrieval practice today, and easy read. So if you're a teacher in the classroom, grab those couple of things, spend an hour in the afternoon, have a read, and you can get on that journey if you haven't got leadership pushing that in your school. Evidence for Learning is also helpful from Australia, and What Works Clearinghouse. So once it's distilled, it's out there. The next step is demonstrating classroom examples. And really here, if a leader can't demonstrate, how can you expect your teachers to do it in the classroom as well? We try and keep it simple and easy. We don't want to add more load to the teachers, but we want to give them simple tips and strategies to get that research into the classroom. The next one, making sure we're trial through collaboration. Our focus is on our students improving. So we want to collaborate with the teachers, to move the students forward. Are they becoming better writers? Are they becoming better readers? Are their math skills improving? Collaborate with those teachers, in the classroom, helping them out there. And also that collaboration happens from teacher to teacher as well. And sort of the last step we use is, look for innovation. Teachers come up with amazing things, and really taking those innovative ideas and getting them in the classroom. So I thought I'd share an example. So we looked at getting some research-based teaching principles into our school. We've done a lot of work on cognitive load theory, cognitive science, and our teachers have a good understanding of explicit teaching, but we needed strategies to go with that understanding. So we had a look at Baruch Rosenshine's principles of instruction. Leaders analysed, put together what's nice. Some of it's already analysed, ready for you to go. We distilled that through ongoing professional learning. One of the main ones we started with the daily review, making sure they're learning something to mastery, and then adding in weekly and monthly review. So it's not being forgotten, because the forgetting curve from Ebbinghaus talks about it drops off really quick, and we want to avoid the kids forgetting what they're learning. So we did that with the teachers. So that initial focus on daily review, weekly, monthly review. We did a lot of demonstration of classroom examples with that one, simple standing at the front, giving them examples or working with them in the classroom. From there, a lot of trial through collaboration, and we saw some amazing things start to happen with our teachers. Kids retrieving schema and really building deep content knowledge. Examples are the convicts, early colonisation sort of stuff, different biomes, just amazing work happening. And then last of all, support that innovation. It could be little things like displays in the classroom, and presentations that they're using daily as like a warm-up to help them get into the work. So the last thing I'd like to share is just some examples on some simple innovation I've seen at my school. So there on the left, we've got our mathematics retrieval wall, and the teachers put up 3 daily review, weekly review, monthly review, and they start with the daily with a lot more information. And as the kids work through daily review, they build up their knowledge, they know it really well, and then once the teachers think about 80% have got it, they'll move it to weekly review, but they'll review every week. And then once they think, about 90% of kids have it, it'll be a monthly review very small amounts of information, and really about them recalling and making sure they know their stuff. Another nice one there on the right is our schema retrieval from a Year 6 room, and they were looking at a human impact on the environment, and which was just some amazing work they did. You can see that the daily, looking at the ocean information, we've got some nice pictures and descriptions there and definitions, and as they move to weekly, then monthly, you can see the information slowly is taken away, where you look at that last column where it says supercontinent, wetlands biomes, ocean biomes, and forest biomes, and the kids just have to tell everything they know. And it's just amazing that embedding of retrieval practice and mastery learning, that they're able to just retrain so much schema and apply it. When they're reading, they're able to comprehend, and when they're writing, they're able to have ideas. They're not sitting there stuck, what do I write about? And that's the 5 steps for Marsden Road Public School. If you'd like some more information or you want to get in touch, there's my email address and my Twitter handle there at TV the Teacher. Thanks for listening.
Fantastic stuff, Troy. Really, really good. And again, some of the things you said go right to the heart of things. I love the quote about we're not simply guessing or using anecdotes. It's moving beyond that. And the thing I loved about your presentation and your work is it shows research in action. What does it look like using research in action? And the example of the 5 steps is clear, applicable, usable, and at the end of the day, getting research into the classroom is so critically important. That was a fantastic presentation. Thanks so much, Troy. Last but not least, we're going to move to a system leader perspective. And so I'd like to welcome from the OECD, Dr. Tracy Burns. Tracy, welcome.
Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here. I'm coming to you from Paris, so it's morning time here. And I've really enjoyed the previous presentations. It's so nice to see research in action and research in the classroom and how that works. As Lucas said, we take a more international perspective, and we also take a systems level perspective. And that's what I'll be talking about today. And it's nice to have that combination. In my center, we've been working on these issues of how to use research in policy and practice since the 90s, really. And in 2007, we put out a book on this, and there were 3 general points around it. The first was that across the countries we were studying, there was on average low levels of investment in educational research and development. I'm going to say these now, they're old general points, but I'm interested in how much this resonates currently with you. So low levels of investment, weak research policy practice links, and low system capacity on average. This is across countries. In terms of the kinds of methodologies that educational researchers were using, in terms of the availability of knowledge networks and brokerage, and particularly how well people were able to scale up and sustain really great local practice. Because at the end of the day, from a systems perspective, you want to capture that local practice. We've seen 2 great examples here, and you want to be able to spread it across the entire system. One question is, from your perspective, how you feel Australia or your particular state is doing on these questions now. Some of our other audience from other countries can also ask those questions. There's been a lot of progress since 2007, but not all countries are at the same space. The other thing that's changed since then is, of course, the obvious, which is the internet. There's been an explosion of available evidence, and many new actors have emerged. And so if you Google anything, how do I teach maths, or you have instant access to thousands of research results, but we don't know what that research is and the quality of the research. And the traditional gatekeepers of research quality are actually not necessarily used unless, like Troy, you know who to go to and who to rely on. And in addition to that, you also, if we think of our knowledge networks, this is sort of the very traditional way of thinking about there's researchers at the top. I put ourselves there because of our large scale surveys. There's the policy people, ministry or state level departments. There's the actual practitioners, including principal, teachers, and students. But in addition, over time, we have very clear actors, labor unions, obviously, nonprofit organizations, training providers, the textbook publishers. and the people who are training teachers and training other teaching assistants also are active in this discussion. And of course, private sector, parents, increasingly important, and the community themselves. And lastly, but not least, the media. And so if we think about all of these people having access to research and all of these people having a say more and more in education, the question becomes, well, how do we actually make this work on a system level to really reinforce the production and use of quality research? So this is an old-fashioned way, sort of production on one side, use on the other, but it raises some essential questions that I just want to put into the discussion. The first is taking a big step back from the use and saying, well, what about the investment? Now, who is funding the research and for what purpose? Who's setting the agenda? And that's actually key. If we want to talk about being able to use research in a teaching context, are the voices of teachers part of the discussion of how things are being prioritized? Secondly, on a research side, can we improve the capacity? Can we make sure that it's usable? Can we make sure that it's relevant? Can we make sure that it has an impact? Because it's very nice to make all kinds of applicable research, but we need to make sure it's actually usable by the people it's intended for. On the use side, which is the policy and practice side, we obviously need to continue to reinforce the research, policy, practice links. And that means having a conversation about brokerage institutes. So Troy gave some examples that where you actually know it's an objective understanding of research, you can trust its objectivity. Networks themselves are very powerful elements that work informally to do this, but you need to be able to trust it, and you need to be able to understand that it's actually something you can use and know that it's something that you can really utilize immediately. The other question, of course, is how to really involve people. So going from these kinds of conversations, and how do you reach out to more and more people so that you really build the involvement and also build capacity? Because it's very easy to say to build capacity, but it's a lot harder to do. And I found Meg's story super inspiring of just how she did that, and how she also acknowledging that, you know, you're not born an expert. So you start where you are and you grow from there. The good news is, if we look at our international data on teachers, the vast majority of teachers have a positive attitude towards change and innovation. This is our Teacher and Learning International Study. This is self-report. Teachers are asked, are most teachers in your school open to change? And are most teachers in the school searching for new ways to solve problems? The OECD average is in green, and Australia is just to the right of that. You can see a number of other countries across the spectrum. And the good news is the answer is, on average, yes. Over 80% are saying yes, they're open to change. They're looking for new things. And so that's a power and an opportunity that can be harnessed. The bad news, of course, and I probably don't need to tell you this, but research use is not a major focus of initial teacher education or professional development. And so this is, again, our TALIS study, just asking, did you participate in these professional development activities? And there are seminars and courses and reading of literature, etc. But the more you focus on sort of specifically research-oriented activities, the less common it becomes. And so if you actually ask specifically about education research, presenting research, you're just at around 40 to 50% of teachers who say yes. And so one of the big questions is, how do you get beyond that 50%, that 60%, to ideally have it be as widespread as possible? Oops, I have temporarily, there we go. Okay, so in my last few minutes, I want to just actually tell you about a new project we're doing. And this is where I want to sort of make the argument that, sorry, I can't see myself anymore, but I'm assuming everything's still okay. That the work of the Q project in a particular environment matches well with the work that we can do on a systems level. And thinking about what that actually might mean for our work. And so we have a new project on strengthening the impact of education research. It's asking questions around the factors that facilitate or hinder the impact and systemic use of research in both policy and practice. So putting those two links together. asking it how we can assess and safeguard the quality of the research itself, that step back to actually make sure the system is being protected. How can we effectively engage actors, and how can we bring people together, that system level perspective again, and thinking through, what are the connections between practice, policy, and research, and how do we actually produce and use it? I love the Q model that Joe presented at the beginning. I think it's such a powerful way to think through the different elements and how you might want to actually move those forward. One of the first things we've been doing is we ran a policy survey asking ministries, what kinds of activities do you take? How do you support the use of research and policy and practice? And thus far, we have answers from these. We have 37 answers from countries and states and regions. And you can see those mapped out here. We're still encouraging submissions. So if an Australian state would like to submit, we would welcome it. And only one example of a result from me. This is just the relationships piece. So how many times does the ministry ask these organizations to use and work with them on facilitating the use of research and policy? Complicated graph, I won't walk you through all of it, but you can see that areas are brokerage, policy, practice, research, other, and the strength of those relationships is mapped out. And again, you can see it's just very varied across countries. And somewhere like a canton in Switzerland is incredibly active with multiple different actors. And then you have much less interaction with other, in Ireland, for example. And that's a question for the policymakers there. Do they want to involve people, and how? And what's the best way to do that? So I'm actually running out of time, so I'll go through this quickly just to say, there's very different ways to think about how research is used across systems. The US is this very sort of rational learning. You're using evidence, and it's actually legally obliged to use evidence. The UK uses more, you perhaps know about the Education Endowment Foundation, and they really build and work with their research schools to stimulate and work on training. So it's focusing on rigor and relevance and rational learning, but also collaboration, this understanding that you're working together in a system. And one example I want to share with you, which perhaps is less well known, which is coming from the Netherlands, which is really about social partnering. So they have, for example, a national initiative for education research, and its aim is specifically to stimulate reflective practitionerism. And it's focusing here on the relationships, on collaboration between teachers and schoolmasters and school headmasters and other actors, and what does it mean to collaborate and learn socially together. And I'm reflecting some of the presentations that already came through. And one last example is from Norway, or Sweden, sorry, where teacher knowledge is considered in its own right as a source of evidence and connected to research knowledge and brought together in a really interactive way, which is fascinating to see. So I will stop there. I thank you for your attention. My contact is here if you have any questions or comments. Very happy to continue the discussion, and I will pass back to Lucas. Thanks.
Tracy, that was fantastic. Thank you. And it was such a great way to move from very specific concrete examples to a bigger systemic picture. There was so much going on in that presentation that I found to be fascinating. Big questions around who is funding research, how do you identify usable and applicable research? A big thing that I took out was the role of the social towards the end. Relationships become so important at the micro level of the classroom, through the school, between schools, and then within systems. It really resonates with a lot of the stuff we're finding within the Q project itself. Perhaps the most powerful statement I took from your presentation was that incredibly valuable resource of the positive attitude towards change and innovation. This is such a powerful resource that we should never underestimate at systems levels. Teachers in classrooms have a positive, adventurous spirit, and we should be harnessing that. Thank you so much, Tracy. Now, I would like to stay there, Tracy. And by the way, you were visible, audible, everything throughout the presentation. It was terrific. Can I invite our other speakers, Troy, Meg, and Joe, to come back? I'm going to start by taking advantage of my role here tonight by asking you a few quick questions before we then hand it over to our audience for their questions. And I would really like to start with a very basic question to you all, but particularly to Meg and Joe, perhaps, is confidence in the first step. How do you shift confidence? Because it's plays such a powerful role in approaching and using evidence. Meg, perhaps you'd like to start.
Yeah, absolutely, Lucas. I think, as I sort of referenced in my football analogy, perhaps, it's really important to get started, I think. And so having some, a mentor that you can lean on to help you get started can be really useful. But once you sort of get into the game and have identified some great brokers of research evidence or identified some really good theorists who are useful in your context, it really helps to get the ball rolling. And I found for me and for the team I was working with that really assisted in building our confidence. Joe?
Yeah, thanks, Meg. Yeah, just building on that, what educators have been saying to us is that they really want the chance. And I think this really spoke to Meg's context or Meg's presentation. They really want the chance to just have a go. It's okay if they don't get it right the first time. It's okay if the research needs further adaptation or it's not quite the right research to apply in the first instance. But they want to have a risk-free or a safe environment that's set up by their leaders to have a go at using research, make some mistakes, and then learn from them.
Thanks, Joe. Look, Troy, can I just put a quick question to you? I mean, you gave very practical examples of who you turn to for reliable research. How did you go about identifying what was the good stuff?
I guess it's a bit of trial and error to start with, reading and finding what the groups or the companies are putting out there, and then to start off with, we look at it and go, where is that research coming from as well? How are they doing their summaries and things like that? But another side of it is, a few people talked about tonight, is the collaboration. So as a leader, me getting out and collaborating with others as well. I've got an excellent principal, Manisha Kazula, that does already have those networks set up. So it was relatively easy for me to find where to get that research from. Also working with a consultant that has that information as well. So it's sort of a few different areas is where to get that research from, and sort of judging them is by doing a bit of follow-up. What are we reading? Where's that coming from? Is it reliable?
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, again, it reinforces the importance of relationships, the social, and Meg's powerful and evidently wildly popular image of the sporting analogy. We're getting a buzz on social networks. Tracy, one last question to you before we throw it to the audience. What do you think? You're talking about this explosion of knowledge networks. From a systems perspective, what are the best enablers to connecting those knowledge networks? Because you created a kind of ecology of actors. What are the sort of things that enable those actors to interact and to share knowledge?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I think one of the big things is knowing that increasingly, I think there's just a real appetite for it, right? So whether you're a teacher or a school principal or a district authority or even a central ministry or a minister, there's really this understanding that, being able to deliver and sort of guide student learning, at the end of the day, it's about student learning, right? So how to do that best and how to actually make the biggest difference possible. Research can play a really important role. It does play a really important role if you harness it well. And the more examples we have, the more conversations we have, and we see examples concretely like the Q project and Meg's example and Troy's example, I feel like it harnesses a hunger for it. And that is, quite frankly, the biggest driver, because people are looking for it and then they find the networks or they build them if they don't exist. And we've seen that in country after country, that it's, it starts with a dedicated few and then it spreads. And that's really inspiring.
Yeah, inspiring indeed. Thank you, Tracy. So we'll throw it open now to questions coming from the audience. Team, what sort of questions have we got coming through?
So the first question I've got here is from LK, and they would like to know, what advice would you suggest for those working in educational settings where research in the workplace is not fostered or valued, particularly where professional development isn't at the forefront? And so this is a question that may be particularly for Meg or Troy.
Oh, but also for Tracy, because the big touch points that she touched upon for where we could improve is in initial teacher education and professional development. But perhaps we'll start with Meg and Troy and then work to Tracy.
Absolutely. I'll jump in if that's all right, Troy, and then hand over to you. So I would suggest, as I mentioned, I'm very lucky that I work in a workplace where this is fostered and it is valued. But as Tracy just mentioned, networks grow where there are people who are passionate about things. And so if you're passionate about using research to inform your practice, find some teammates who are also passionate about using research to inform their practice. And when you guys get together and have great professional conversations, hopefully soon enough in person rather than over Zoom, then, because we've been doing this in isolation for the last 2 years with COVID in Australia, but you can get together and you can chat about these things, and that encourages this to grow within your setting. And so then, as I mentioned as well, that networking outside of your school's bubble, talking to people in other schools, talking to people who work at the Q project, or, connecting with people online as well is fantastic. And it just allows that to become more of an impetus in your school or whatever your organisation is. It doesn't have to be a school. And that should hopefully lead to that appetite for the professional development and bring it to the forefront. Troy?
Yeah, look, I totally agree with that. A lot of the networking is the big thing there. I did mention in my presentation the idea of groups or organisations that do some of that hard work for you. So if you're a classroom teacher that's a bit isolated or siloed, I guess, go to places like CC. So if you manage to grab my Twitter handle, TV the Teacher, I've posted all those, just after my presentation. Go in and have a look in there. They've done that hard work for you. CC, Centre for Education Statistics and Evaluation, AERO, the Australian Education Research Organisation, Evidence for Learning. They do that, and you can grab nice, easy guides and articles to read to make your job a bit easier. And then jump in, use them in the classroom. And like Meg said, once you start doing it, get other people to come in and see it, and they'll see how amazing it is. And if the kids are improving, you'll get more people on board. They'll be like, why aren't we doing that? We need to do that too.
Yeah, love it. Absolutely love it. Tracy, we in the Q project are preoccupied at the moment with professional learning. That's the major strand of work we're doing, moving from understanding to improvement. Do you have any thoughts about those touch points to actually improve and boost professional learning and development?
Yeah, and I think it's really important that there be sort of a combined initiative, because there's a lot of work that can be done by the individual and connecting to sort of a critical mass, right? And I think as both Troy and Meg have pointed out, it's really important and key, and it can make the difference between sort of being lonely and isolated and having people that inspire and give you energy. But I also think that there's a broader question of responsibility here, because it doesn't just boil down to the teacher, right? It boils down to the desire of everyone to have education serve the needs of its students. And that means that teachers can be pushing, but if they're alone and pushing in an environment that they don't feel is listening to them, there's also a question about, well, what about the other actors? Can parents help? Because they obviously want what's best for their children. What are the pressures that can be put on ministry and local authorities to sort of join the conversation? And how can it be clearly, the case be made both politically, but also financially, that an investment in this and supporting this through continuing professional development, through facilitating, what you're doing in your day-to-day, is actually really an investment in the future of schooling and the quality of education. And I think that piece, which isn't, I don't actually think that's the responsibility of individual teachers. I think their voices are super powerful, but there also needs to be a responsibility from the other players to say, right, we're going to facilitate this. And we are going to do it because we have a vision for our education. And that includes research as an element of, a fabulous student learning experience. So for me, it's a conversation of how do you as the teacher sort of branch into what exists, and then a conversation about how can we connect also to the other forces that can put pressure from another direction, so that it's understood the value and the time is made, because often it's nice to have, and we have many stories of teachers who take their time and work at nights, but it doesn't, if it's not valued and incorporated as part of your day, it can be a very lonely job at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And I'm quite heartened by the fact that, and I think I could speak for the Q team here, that we're heartened by the kinds of signals that are coming at state and federal levels about the importance of research use in schools. Jo, did you have anything to add to that before we move on to the next question?
No, there's just a particular quote from a principal at another Q partner school that I just think sort of captures all of that, both at a system level and at a school level. And he talks about the coalition of the willing. You must find the coalition of the willing, and through that there will be, a wave of change. And I love that, because I think it captures exactly what Tracy, Meg and Troy are speaking at different levels of the system.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jo. I'm glad to see that part of George W. Bush's legacy is positive in relation to the coalition of the willing. So do we have any other questions from the audience?
We've got quite a few questions, Lucas, and Twitter's going crazy as well. So we'll try and get through a few more. We've got one from Stephanie, who's asking, it's actually a two-part question and probably thrown out to the whole panel. Where does teacher expertise belong in the research implementation and use process? And the second part is, teachers sometimes experience research evidence as undermining or contradicting their knowledge. How do we reconcile?
Wow, they're two big questions. Probably could have done one and then the other. Who wants to start? Let's start with the second one, about when it challenges your pre-existing notion of things, or challenges what you believe to be true. Anyone want to have a go at that?
Do you want me to start on the first bit?
Go, Jo.
Okay. What teachers and school leaders are telling us, and I'll context this by saying it's teachers, and firstly, research and teachers' knowledge don't sit as separate things. Yeah, they're both as valuable as each other, and they work best in concert. But what teachers and school leaders are telling us, and I'd be fascinated with Meg and Troy's view on this, but research plays an important role in informing knowledge, informing approaches, deepening insights into either subject areas or processes or whatever. At some point, when teachers and school leaders are then trialling and adapting that for their own needs, for their own practices, and putting it into practice, the lines between research and their own knowledge or their own action research in the classrooms becomes blurry. And in fact, one school principal gave me some excellent advice in the last couple of months. He said, Q Project, stop thinking of research and what happens in the classroom as two separate things. Research becomes a part of the classroom practice. And I thought that was just a beautiful insight into how the two work in tandem.
I think that is very well said, Jo, and it really is a thread running through what Troy was talking about. Do you want to add anything to what Jo said then, Troy, before I move to you, Meg?
Yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, it's what's best for the kids. The kids in the classroom, you want them to become better, better readers, better writers, better people in general. And if you're doing something, you have to ask yourself, is this the best I can do for these kids in front of me? if the way you're teaching reading, is it getting the best results? For those that are not being successful, what can be done to help? And that's where you look to the research. So sometimes it's, rather than saying the teacher is doing the wrong or not being evidence-based, it's what are the kids missing, or what are the gaps the kids are missing out on? How can we help those kids fill those gaps, and what's there out there to help us to help the kids? And I think that's really the main part of it. And often through that lens, if improving our students, we can get that research in and sort of soften the blow, looking at that second part where undermining or contradicting their knowledge.
Fantastic, Troy. Meg, anything to add?
Yeah, I love what Troy said, and I always try to think in that really student-centered way as well. But working with the teams that I work with at my school, I would say one of the things that could be a factor in teachers perhaps feeling undermined or contradicted, or a reason that they might not be open to the use of research evidence, would be that they don't feel safe to undertake that experimentation, that they're concerned about how it might reflect on their own practice, or how it might reflect on what they're achieving for the students. Because at the end of the day, teachers are teachers because they want the best for their students, exactly as Troy said. And so it's very personal to feel that you're doing it right. And so I think one of my jobs as a middle leader is to really translate from the principal class at my school to the classroom teachers that sense that they're in a position where they can take risks and they'll be supported by the school, and they can consider research evidence that might contradict what they're currently doing, because it won't reflect poorly on them. In fact, it will reflect positively on them because they're improving their practice and they're committed to improving their practice. And that if they feel that the research evidence isn't right for our context, one of my jobs as a middle leader is to help them really understand our school context and our school's vision and values. Make sure that that's really communicated very clearly and understood very clearly by our classroom teachers. It comes from the top, our principal, and he's very strong in communicating that, but I'm a conduit of that to our classroom teachers. And so I think that sort of safety to experiment and also that understanding of context is a really key role that middle leaders can play in that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Meg. Tracy, Joe has raised this idea about this division between thinking about the role of research and educational practice. From an international perspective, do you see systems that reflect that meshing? Because we started on the Q project with this idea of teaching as a profession requiring expertise. Do you see differences across the system in terms of how research use is integrated as part of the profession that's reflected from those kind of signals that are sent from the top down, as you raised before?
Absolutely. And I'm going to cheat and jump in with a couple of other remarks that I was inspired by. First, I can't give enough stars and various other things to what Meg said about being able to take risks. Our international data show very clearly that teachers often feel like this isn't possible. I showed that teachers are open to change, but if you ask them, are you incentivized? Are you potentially penalized if you make a mistake? Those kinds of things. Those conversations are really connected to how willing you are to take a risk if you're new and if you're not necessarily in a supportive environment. And I think that that's a huge issue to think through. If we want teachers to be knowledge professions, and they are, we want to acknowledge that. What are the incentive structures and how are we building the system to actually deliver that? Because all countries struggle with it. We have a project specifically on teaching as a knowledge profession at the OECD, and we're actually creating a whole new assessment for it to try and, in a way, measure it and make it appreciable in a way, because it's easy to say, but then what does that actually mean concretely? And it's not just about, well, can I facilitate research use? It's like, how does that work into how you recruit and retain teachers? I mean, what's your vision for the teaching profession? And is it actually something that's going to keep reinforcing and nurturing this idea as teachers as knowledge professionals, as opposed to saying it's important, but then taking some decisions which actually undermine that view? So it's really an important conversation. I think it's incredibly important. And the one last thing I wanted to add was asking the question of where does teacher expertise belong in the process? I'd go back to one of my first points, which is it's not just about implementation and use, eh? I mean, teachers are also part of the design of research. And we would argue that they're part of how you set priorities for research. When we go back to that question of who's funding and who chooses, some of those questions are questions that teachers should absolutely be a part of. Because if they're also able to contribute and say, this is what we struggle with, we need to know more, and that sets also funders' priorities so that they can ask researchers to do this, that means that it's much more likely that the research that emerges is useful for teachers. And that's actually part of the system vision, where if you're bringing the people in, the user in at the beginning, then it makes it unsurprisingly much more relevant at the end.
Well said. Thanks, Tracy. We've got time for a couple more questions. Dean,
So our next question, the audience member has actually directed this one to Tracy. So is there any discernible difference between the attitude towards the use of research in schools in Australia compared to schools on the international level?
That's a great question, and I wish we had the data for that. Certainly, there's an openness to the discussion and an awareness. We see even just the existence of the Q project and the people who are here today means that this is something that does not exist in many other countries. Sorry, I said that wrong. I can say that this presence and this ability of this conversation here is something that would not be that common. You see real leaders of England is always the real leader of this, but I'm from Canada, that's part of the conversation. There's people in Ireland, there's people in Switzerland, there's people in different systems that are really on board, Chile also, for example. But then what does it mean in a lot of the countries where this is not part of the conversation? In fact, it's just an absence of these discussions. So we don't have data. I can't tell you Australia ranks, 10th or 3rd or whatever it is. But I can tell you that the kinds of conversations that you're having are definitely more common here and more common in some of the countries I listed than in the vast majority of countries that we work with.
very interesting and somewhat perversely heartening for the type of work we're trying to do here.
It is heartening. I'm here as your cheerleader, because I think it's actually such important work, and it's so inspirational. And just to say, we had a meeting yesterday of 20 different systems. We'll be reporting to our governing board of 38 countries. And one of the things we're going to be doing is sharing also the excellent work that the Q project is doing, because it's a world leader in asking these super important questions. And I think that is contributing to the international knowledge base, as well as your national and state priorities.
Thank you, Tracy. All right, I think we've got time for one more question, perhaps.
Great, thanks, Lucas. We've got a comment just stating that all the presentations were great, and the same person has asked if they'd like to get some insight from Megan Troy, but probably open that to the panel as well, about how they create demand among staff for change and implementation of research in their schools.
Let's start with Meg.
Thanks, Lucas. Yeah, look, I think I'd draw on something that Troy mentioned before, and it's really, in my mind, and what I've seen at our school, is it's about people seeing it be really useful and work really well and change practice and in a positive way, and therefore change outcomes for students for the better. And so in our school, when teachers have been able to see the use of evidence impacting the way that we do things in our school, so for instance with the tutor group program, and seeing the positive impact that has on our kids, it's really motivating to think, well, I could do that too. I could use that to inform a decision that I need to make. And even if it's on a smaller scale, or even if it's in a different area, I can use research evidence too, because my colleagues are capable of doing it. And I know that I have colleagues who can support me. And so, Jo spoke in her presentation about the 4 ways that leaders are critical. And one of those was particularly that supporting element. And so when they know that they have staff and leaders who can support them in implementing the use of research as well, then I think that will start to develop that appetite to give it a go.
From my point of view, we sort of have two ways to get to that. We have a whole school level. So our school plan, everything drives, getting the research into the classroom, using the steps I showed earlier, and really making sure that research and evidence-based practice is driving our improvement for our kids. Then, like I've said plenty of times, it's our kids we want to focus on. Are we getting more, improvement from them? Are they becoming successful citizens? When they finish primary school to move to high school. So there's that system level, I guess, at our school, but there's also the other level of through that collaboration and the sharing. Some of the, and with that, you need some growers, I guess, on your staff. So they're the ones that you'll target and really encourage them to share what they've got, because they're the ones that have a bit of capital in the school and go, oh, you should try this. I'm getting this out of the kids. Oh my God, I had the amazing work today. You should have seen their writing sample. Those little successes and wins really help spread the bug throughout the school. I never forget last year, some second year teachers, we've got a set of twins actually, those two boys having a chat with me. I'm like, go and share that with someone else. Second year teachers, they were worried, sharing with some of the teachers that are more experienced, but it was able to spread the bug, and they sort of teamed up with some other more experienced teachers, and it started to really spread the idea of reviewing and retrieval practice with our kids, and it just sort of it snowballed, and now it's sort of in a lot of the classrooms. So when they come to team meetings, they share, and I think that's another important way as well. So I guess a system level, but also choose your individuals that will help move it forward.
Thanks, Troy. It's nice to hear talk about something viral that isn't related to the pandemic. Joe, have you got any other perspectives, anything to add from the Q research?
No, I think the way that Meg and Troy, I got to say, I'm just loving the practical and real life experience that Meg and Troy are bringing here. I can't top anything that they've said in that regard. I think they're giving really practical and real advice to other school leaders and teachers out there.
Thanks, Joe. All right, so one final comment. I'm actually riffing off something that Maria has said online, and it's to you, Tracy. Really, a theme that's come out of tonight is taking risks and having the space and the time and the culture to take risks. But governments, particularly in the last 20 years, one of the central measures of governance has been minimising risk. How do you, at a systems level, how do you foster risk?
Yeah, I mean, this is, if I had an answer to that question that worked, I would be an extremely wealthy person. There's two ways that we've been working on it. The first is just by pointing it out, right? Like that one of the things that governments are very mindful of course, is that it's public money and they need to invest wisely. And so as part of that discussion, it's reducing the possibility for error. You want to make sure you're spending and that all the actions actually lead to something good. But then at the same time, they also have a lot of sort of policy discussions about how important it is to be creative and innovative and teach new skills, etc. And we just point out that there's an inherent tension there. You can't ask teachers to be creative and innovative, etc., without taking risks. I mean, it's just not possible. So it's from our position, we actually point out that there's a tension. You have this policy goal and you have this policy goal, that actually they can cancel each other out if you're not careful. So how do you, as a system, in this case, a state level or a national level, how do you want to deal with it? But know that you will take a penalty. If you encourage risk-taking, you might have more mistakes. If you don't allow for it, you might have less innovation. And I mean, every context makes its own decision. Every budget is handled in its own way. But to sort of underline that and point that out is key. And the other thing we try and do is, and this very much we talk about also when people are using technologies and stuff, is just to say, look, risk is actually not the same thing as harm, right? So you can take a risk and you can win. Actually, you can do amazing things. And I think we can get everybody on board with the idea that no one wants to harm. I mean, that's absolutely to be avoided, right? So harm is what we want to avoid. We don't want to avoid risk-taking. We want to avoid harm. And that's something we try and work with and discuss at a national level.
Wow. That's a great answer. I realised as I was asking the question that it was a very difficult question, Tracy, and that's a superb answer. I promised I wouldn't ask hard questions, and I've ended on one. So, look, I'm going to wrap it up at this point. What our intention was for this webinar was to be able to present some data on our own research and then explore practical ways of engaging in research use in schools, what it might look like, and then spiral up towards a system level and back again. And we have exceeded expectations during this discussion. And we're getting positive feedback already from our audience. And I really sincerely want to thank you all, Joe, Tracy, Meg, and Troy, for a superb collection of presentations for this evening. Thank you all very much. There's like virtual clapping going on in the void ether of the internet.